I never wanted grand. I wanted quiet, personal, real. Our wedding was nestled in the lush curve of a riverside arboretum, a space that held no chandeliers, no red carpet, just wildflowers and April light filtering through branches that had been there longer than any of us. 70 people, mostly our friends, some mentors, and a few distant cousins who had always sent Christmas cards even when no one else did. No swans, no string quartet, just us. Hudson Valley in spring has a way of smelling like beginnings. I breathed it in slowly, as if holding that scent would keep me from breaking apart at the seams. There was no need for marble staircases or multi-tiered ice sculptures. I didn't want to perform love. I wanted to live it. My sister's wedding had been different. 500 guests at a Manhattan hotel, drones filming her arrival like it was a Hollywood premiere. That night, she wore a $30,000 dress. There were fireworks, imported orchids, a chocolate fountain taller than me. I smiled through it. I clapped when expected. I held her veil. And yet, the RSVP for my wedding arrived late. Her note had read, "I'll try to make it." My parents didn't call to confirm either, just forwarded a generic email response. And yet I had still reserved them the best seats, closest to the altar. There was a small voice in me, still hoping. One of my former professors hugged me near the check-in table and whispered, "You don't need applause to be valid. You just need to be present." I clung to that. The soft background music played on, gentle acoustic guitar mixed with the occasional rustle of leaves and chatter. Guests smiled, finding their seats. The afternoon sun softened, casting golden slants across the lawn. Then she arrived, 20 minutes late. I didn't need to look up. I felt her presence before I saw it, just like I always did. Her heels struck the cobblestones like punctuation marks. Gold sequins rippled down a dress that screamed to be seen from space, the kind of gown that would have made the bride in any other wedding feel small. "Look who decided to drop in," I heard someone whisper. Vashti. The name still carried weight in the rooms we shared, like a crown no one dared touch. She air-kissed my mother, clasped my father's arm, posed for a few flashes. She barely looked at me. I didn't expect a speech or a hug, but the total disregard, that still caught somewhere behind my ribs. "Isn't that your sister?" a guest asked me softly. "Yes." "You don't look related." That made me smile, and not the polite kind. The ceremony was moments away. My soon-to-be husband stood at the front, adjusting his tie, watching me like I was a lighthouse and he'd been lost at sea. I took my seat in the front row, while Vashti was ushered to sit beside our parents. Her perfume trailed behind her, sharp, calculated. The officiant cleared his throat, signaling it was time. My heart pulsed in a rhythm I didn't recognize, part joy, part survival. As people mingled before the start, sipping lemonade and commenting on the decor, I heard her. "I mean, seriously," Vashti said to our cousin in a not-so-hushed voice. "Is this a wedding or a beggars' parade?" It cut through the air sharper than the spring chill. Someone laughed, a quick, nervous chuckle. Someone else looked down at their cup. My stomach flipped, not from the insult, but from the ease with which she delivered it. Another guest nearby subtly pulled out their phone, perhaps filming the scenery, perhaps recording her. I couldn't tell. I looked straight ahead. My spine straightened. I breathed in. I breathed out. That phrase, "Beggars' Parade," echoed louder than any wedding bells. It took me back to every family dinner I'd dressed up for, only to be told I looked plain. To every award I won, only to be reminded Vashti had better posture during hers. My fiancé reached over and held my hand. No words, just presence. My eyes softened. My lips curved. I smiled, not for the guests, but for myself. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was reclamation. At the reception, Vashti sat flanked by both parents at the center table. Champagne flutes shimmered around them like trophies. I chose to sit beside Aunt Millie, my husband's 82-year-old aunt who once told me, "Elegance is what you keep, not what you flaunt." She wore a lavender shawl and smelled like gardenias. "You made the right choice, dear," she said without looking up. Guests noticed. Heads turned. Some whispered. The quiet shift was felt, not spoken. My best friend leaned in, asking if I wanted to confront Vashti. No, I said, tearing a piece of bread. Let them speak. I'm still writing my story. I thought of something Maya Angelou once said. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. Vashti had been showing me my whole life. I was just done pretending not to see. As I watched her raise her glass, laughing with her head tilted back, I didn't feel envy. I felt freedom. It wasn't always like this. There was a time I would have given anything for her approval. I remembered the regional science fair when I was 15, first place for a project on wind energy. I was so proud, practically glowing. Vashti walked past my display, glanced at my shoes, and muttered, "You're wearing those?" No congratulations, no interest. Just that. I remember thinking maybe next time I'd pick better shoes. But no shoe could have walked me into her spotlight. That space wasn't made for two. It wasn't about the venue, or the flowers, or the dress. It was about the choice to celebrate me, or not. And this time, I celebrated myself. The music shifted, cueing the first dance. I stood, brushing imaginary lint from my dress. The garden lights flickered on, casting long shadows against the path ahead. I stepped away from the center table, from the noise, toward the open lawn. A voice echoed again in my head. Hers. Beggars Parade. I turned slightly, just as a figure stepped out from the darkness near the edge of the garden, holding a camera, and behind them, a full crew. After the first dance ended and the applause settled into background chatter, guests slowly migrated toward the dining area. It was subtle at first, the shuffle of linen skirts and the muted clinks of chairs being adjusted. But once I entered the tented reception space, it hit me. Table numbers weren't just numbers. They were declarations. My table, along with those assigned to my closest friends, professors, and former co-workers, was wedged in the back, tucked behind a structural column near the swinging doors that led directly into the kitchen. Each time the doors opened, the aroma of reheated potatoes and the jarring clang of silverware tumbling into dish trays followed. We were barely within earshot of the speeches. The buzz of dishwashers competed with the wedding playlist. My dress, once admired during the ceremony, now absorbed the faint scent of bleach from nearby mop buckets. Across the tent, the center table glistened like something out of a gala brochure. Crystal glasses, monogrammed napkins, floral runners, and Vashti in the center, basking under a miniature chandelier strung up just for that section. Surrounding her were local officials, 2 magazine editors, a socialite who only RSVP'd because she thought it was the wedding of the year. And my parents, of course, laughing, toasting, completely absorbed. My husband leaned closer. Is this intentional? I didn't answer right away. I glanced at the distance between us and them, too far for photos, too far for sound, but close enough to feel like an afterthought. Nothing they do is accidental, I said quietly, eyes still on Vashti's glittering silhouette. He didn't ask anything more. I used to think I was overreacting, paranoid, too sensitive. But after a lifetime of moments like this, too many to count, I stopped dismissing what I knew in my bones. They calculated everything, even the angle at which I'd be cropped out of group photos. Halfway through dinner, I made my way toward the gift table. I wasn't expecting anything extravagant. I certainly wasn't there to tally brands or price tags. But what I saw next still managed to punch the air out of my lungs. A square, foil-wrapped box sat near the corner. Taped onto it was a white card. Someone had crossed out the original names with a pen, but if you squinted, you could still read the faded imprint. To the Smiths, congratulations on your union. The handwriting on the new card was unmistakably my mother's. My fingers brushed the bow, then stopped. I knew this box. She'd shown it to me years ago when she bragged about regifting a crystal decanter from a charity auction she hadn't even attended. I didn't say anything then. I just smiled, pretending I didn't care. Now it was my turn to receive it. Full circle. Behind me, my college roommate muttered, "You can't make this stuff up." I laughed, a low, short exhale. It wasn't funny, but it was. A quote from my grandmother floated into my head, something she'd told me while slicing apples for pie one summer. When people give you crumbs, don't bake them a cake. I whispered. They gave me leftovers and expected gratitude. Back at our table, one of my coworkers looked uncomfortable. He gestured toward the center of the room. We can swap tables if you want. Ours is closer to the dance floor. I shook my head. No need. I'm exactly where I belong tonight. An older guest across from me, someone I vaguely remembered from a family vacation years ago, leaned in and said, "Back in my day, we'd call this what it is, disrespect." I smiled at her. "And what would you do about it?" "Smile bigger," she said, then raised her glass. "Like you're the damn queen of the basement." Vashti stood suddenly and tapped her spoon against her glass. All eyes turned to her. "Thank you, everyone, for coming to this very cozy celebration," she began, voice dripping with performative sincerity. "It's heartwarming to see such a modest gathering." My hand tightened around my fork. I wasn't going to react. Not outwardly. "She raises glasses like a queen," I whispered to myself, forgetting there's a village behind her. My parents clapped too enthusiastically, nodding as if her words were poetry. It was theater, and they were her devoted audience. Beneath the table, my husband gently placed his hand over mine. "Still proud of you," he murmured. I didn't turn to him. I kept my eyes on Vashti. This isn't about pride anymore. It's about clarity. As the night wore on, I began to notice the shifting energy, not just at our table, but throughout the room. People started leaning in closer to me, asking genuine questions, offering compliments that felt real, not rehearsed. A family friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, approached and bent slightly. "We see what's happening. You deserve better." I nodded. That was all I could do. I didn't cry. I didn't flare with anger. I didn't excuse them either. I simply absorbed, like earth takes in rain after a drought. Every insult, every omission, they weren't daggers anymore. They were bricks. And I was building something. At one point, a child's voice cut through the chatter. "Why is Aunt Ayala's table near the kitchen?" A mother's hand quickly covered the child's mouth, whispering a correction I couldn't hear. But the question lingered, echoing louder than any toast. I glanced across the tent once more. Vashti was mid-laugh, her head tossed back, eyes bright. To most, she looked radiant, powerful, untouchable. But to me, she looked small, swimming in borrowed light. A quote from a lecture I once attended came to mind. "Dignity is silent. Arrogance needs a microphone." I didn't stand to toast. I didn't make a speech. I let the silence do the talking. As dessert was being served, petit four and champagne truffles, I felt eyes on me. I glanced toward the head table. My father's gaze flicked to me, brief, unsure. Then, as if embarrassed by the moment, he turned quickly back to Vashti. He didn't have to say it. I already knew. I looked down to cut my dessert, only to notice a folded slip of paper beside my plate. I hadn't seen who left it. Opening it slowly, I read, "We see everything. Keep your head up." After the last fork clinked against the edge of a dessert plate and the music softened to an ambient hum, the lights dimmed slightly. A hush came over the reception tent, the kind of polite silence that follows the click of a remote. The projector flickered to life on the cream-colored side panel, and a looping slideshow began to play, what they called a celebration of family. I folded my hands on my lap and braced myself. These things always started innocently enough. Black and white baby photos, school portraits, dance recitals, beach vacations, family holidays. And there she was, Vashti in every frame. Dressed as a ballerina at age 5, beaming on the front porch with a medal from a high school debate, beaming again in a cap and gown, riding in a white limousine on her wedding day. The transitions were smooth, the photos high resolution. It was clear time and effort had gone into curating the highlights. I waited for the glimpse of me, the sister who'd shared those years too. Finally, an image blinked by, a single grainy picture of me at 11, standing in the background at a cousin's birthday party. My head half turned, eyes mid-blink, stuck between cake and balloons, not even centered, not even paused long enough for anyone to notice. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the slideshow moved on to more footage of Vashti, her baby shower, her charity work, her magazine cover spread. The audience offered soft chuckles and sentimental sighs. A few people shifted in their chairs. I noticed it. Not many, but enough. Some blinked and looked toward me. Others looked away entirely. My breath caught. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. This wasn't an oversight. It was a message. It wasn't a mistake, I thought. It was intentional. I had been edited out of my own family's story. I glanced at my husband beside me. His jaw was tight, eyes fixed on the screen. He didn't look at me, but I saw his hand move across his lap, slowly curling into a fist. As the montage continued, I sat straighter. I didn't tear up. I didn't exhale dramatically. I didn't whisper to anyone nearby. I just watched as the crowd clapped gently for a highlight reel of someone else's life. When the slideshow ended, the lights returned and the room applauded. The applause faded faster than usual. My husband leaned toward me, voice low. They really didn't even try. No, I said, barely moving my lips. And maybe that was the point. He nodded once. Then, like he was afraid he might say something he couldn't take back, he said nothing more. As people began to rise from their seats and make their way toward the open bar, I overheard someone whisper behind me, maybe they just didn't have the right files. I smiled politely, gave a small shrug, and replied, that happens. But I knew better. You don't miss years of memories by accident. You don't forget both daughters unless you never planned to include them in the first place. I excused myself and walked toward the back exit, the one that led to the side garden. I needed air. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I needed a place where my silence wouldn't feel so loud. That's when I heard them. Just beyond the arch of roses, half shadowed by string lights, I saw them, my parents, and Vashti. I'm glad we stuck with the original, my mother was saying. No need to add filler. Filler. My hands went cold. My father added, this is Vashti's night. She's always had the poise for this sort of thing. Ayala's? Fine. But this family's name needs someone with real presence. Vashti laughed. Please, she'd fall apart if someone asked her to speak at a charity event. You really think she could ever carry the name? The words didn't sting. They didn't even pierce. They just confirmed what had already been made plain in pixels and applause. I didn't move. I didn't step forward or make a scene. I didn't interrupt their conversation or demand acknowledgement. I stood still. I listened. And for the first time, I believed them. They never hid it, I thought. I just refused to listen. I walked away, my heels pressing softly into the gravel path. The laughter behind me faded as I stepped back into the glow of the reception tent. People were dancing now, others talking in clusters. A table nearby spilled with untouched desserts. Nothing had changed, but everything had shifted. I took my seat again, a little further back this time. My husband handed me a glass of water. I accepted it wordlessly. A guest leaned over and smiled at me. The montage was lovely, wasn't it? It was very informative, I replied. She looked puzzled, but didn't press. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. My fingers moved without hesitation, typing a brief message. Let's go ahead with the original plan. No more waiting. I sent it without rereading. Within seconds, the response lit up on my screen. Understood. I'll start preparing the files. This time, the whole truth will be visible. After the last of the slideshow applause fizzled and conversations returned to their soft, semi-drunken murmur, I stepped away from the tent and into the corridor near the coat check. I needed a moment alone, not to collect myself, but to open a message I hadn't dared to read earlier. A guest had forwarded me an email thread. The subject line was unmistakable. Presentation edits. Bride content. I read it once, then again. It was addressed to the AV coordinator and came from someone listed only as Alex, assistant planner. But the tone didn't sound like a planner's assistant. It sounded deliberate, too clean, too curated. Please ensure the final video does not include designer references for the bride's dress. This is a personal preference from family leadership, and we'd like to avoid diluting the focus. family leadership. The message was signed with a polite, warmly Alex, followed by a blank, no phone number, no official footer. A red flag. I forwarded it immediately to Alex from the planning team, the actual one. "Did you send this?" I asked. A few minutes later, his response arrived, "No, and that's not one of ours." I sent it next to my friend Drew, tech wizard, patient listener, and the kind of person who once helped me recover a corrupted thesis file at 2 a.m. He'd be discreet. I wrote, "Can you trace the IP? I just want to know where it came from." My fingers hovered before pressing send, then tapped out one final line. They didn't just want to ignore me. They wanted to silence me. The message flew out. I stared down the empty hallway, dimly lit by twinkle lights taped to the molding. My face in the narrow mirror beside the coat rack looked calm, maybe even serene. But behind the stillness, something had turned. It wasn't rage, it was resolve. I remembered a quote I once saw scribbled on a subway ad, of all places. "Erasure isn't always deletion. It's sometimes design." I walked back toward the tent as the breeze lifted the edge of my dress. The music had shifted into something upbeat. People danced, others mingled at the bar. A few sat back down for seconds at the dessert table. The night was winding down, but not for me. An hour later, Drew's reply lit up my screen. "Got it. IP is registered to a residential address in Brooklyn. Tracked through a masked proxy, but not well. It routes back to Vashti's home office Wi-Fi. Want the full report?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." I tucked my phone into my clutch, my hands still. My stomach didn't flip, my eyes didn't sting. I'd already known. This was just the paperwork. She needs me gone to feel big, I thought. That had always been the formula. Cut off the oxygen, then shine alone. A memory, crisp and unwelcome, flashed. College sophomore year. I had started a blog, not about fashion or family, but about sustainability, a topic that had become the core of my work today. Vashti had skimmed it once, looked up and said, "That stuff makes us look weak. Nobody wants to read about ethics. They want aspirational." I had taken the blog down that same week. Back then, I still believed she might be right, that maybe visibility came from shine, not substance. Now, I understood differently. This wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control, wrapped in polished packaging, served with a smile. Control that masqueraded as concern, that called itself protection while stripping away recognition. I didn't explode. I didn't confront. I logged the email. I saved the screenshot. Exhibit A. Let them act. I'll archive every move. By the time I re-entered the main space, people were dancing again. I stood for a second, letting the sound settle around me, the laugh track of my family's curated legacy. Across the tent, I saw Vashti posing with a group of influencers. Her lips formed a perfect smile, her hand curled around a champagne flute. Not a wrinkle out of place. She caught my eye briefly, but looked through me as if I were just another shadow. My husband stepped toward me. "Everything okay?" I looked up. Everything just became clearer. We sat for the final course. Cake was being plated. I took one slow bite, letting the sugar melt. Not a single nerve buzzed. No adrenaline, just a kind of awareness. Like slipping on a coat I forgot I owned. A friend leaned in, her brow furrowed slightly. "There's something different in your eyes tonight." "There should be," I said. "I've stopped trying to be seen." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I'm about to be undeniable." Later, with most guests lost in conversation or already filtering out to their cars, I slipped away to a quiet corner with my phone. I pulled up a folder I hadn't touched in weeks, labeled June Plan. It held screenshots, messages, receipts, images from dress fittings, behind-the-scenes photos no one had ever seen. I tapped Sync to Cloud. Then I composed a new email, not emotional, not dramatic, just measured. To planner@eventco.com, venue@riversideestate.com, xanthi.office@couturedesigners.com. Subject, clarification request documentation. I included the anonymous email, the IP trace. I copied Vashti, no accusations, just a gentle nudge. Please confirm if these edits were approved officially. I've attached records that may need review. I hit send. As the band packed up and lights dimmed, I let the evening settle like dust after movement. Then my phone pinged. The message was from the fashion house's publicist. We'd like to confirm if we're allowed to mention you in the fashion showcase next week. Looks like someone tried to block us. The sky outside had gone fully dark by the time the final part of the program was called. There was a gentle chime from the speakers and a soft voice over the mic. Please turn your attention to the screen once more for a short featurette from the bride's stylist team. Guests shifted, murmurs dropped to quiet anticipation. The screen came to life with a montage of floral designs, carefully arranged centerpieces, footage of the caterers placing hors d'oeuvres on trays. The transitions were clean. The music, something vaguely instrumental, sounded like it belonged in a spa waiting room. But that was it. No dress, no behind-the-scenes fittings, no short film from the designer team I'd worked with for months. I waited for the sequence that was supposed to show the creative process behind the gown, how the stitching was inspired by the curvature of river stones, how we worked late into the night making sure the silhouette said confidence, not compromise, nothing. The video ended. A polite round of applause followed. The room returned to full lights, and the servers began preparing for cake. I glanced toward the AV booth. Two of the techs exchanged glances. One shook his head slightly. The other gave a stiff nod when our eyes met, as if to say, "We saw it too." I kept my face neutral. This wasn't a surprise. It was just another cut, this one clean, technical, silent. You didn't just remove a clip, I thought. You tried to erase how I carried myself tonight. A woman sitting at the next table leaned toward me, her brows creased. Wasn't there supposed to be something about your dress? I smiled lightly. Not everything beautiful needs broadcasting. Her confusion lingered, but she nodded, accepting the comment for what it was, a full stop. My friend Liz, seated beside me, leaned in. Want me to say something to them? I shook my head. Let them think they've won this round. I could feel it again, the dull heat under my skin, not anger, not embarrassment, but calculation. A slow, deliberate awareness. I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't even hurt. I was just finished with pretending it didn't matter. A flash from therapy returned to me. One session where I had told my counselor I always felt this need to prove myself, to be visible. She had looked at me without blinking and said, "Power is what you don't say out loud." That night, I realized silence could be louder than performance. And right now, I was choosing silence again. But this time, not out of fear, out of strategy. My husband gently reached for my hand under the table. You okay? Better than they think. As guests began gathering near the cake table, I rose slowly, smoothing the fabric of my gown, still pristine despite the night's attempts to smear or silence it. In the midst of the crowd, just before the cake was sliced, I felt a small tug on my gown. I looked down to find Tatiana, my friend Danielle's daughter, staring up at me with huge brown eyes and slightly crooked glasses. "You're the prettiest bride I've ever seen," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I hope I get to be just like you." I crouched down instantly, pulling her into a hug without hesitation. Her tiny arms wrapped around my neck with the kind of certainty only children offer. No hesitation, no agenda, no audience, just truth. I whispered, "You already are." I held her longer than I probably should have, but in that moment, that 5-year-old child was the only person in the entire reception who made me feel like I wasn't pretending, like I belonged, like I was seen. I could hear people nearby pausing, watching. One woman wiped at the corner of her eye, another smiled softly. I stood slowly, brushing Tatiana's curls back from her cheek. "Thank you," I said. She beamed and skipped off, unaware of the crater she'd just patched inside my chest. That hug weighed 5 pounds, but it carried my whole heart back to safety. When the cake was finally served, I barely tasted it. I smiled through polite conversation. I nodded when people offered compliments that now felt like afterthoughts. But my mind was elsewhere, already piecing together the next move. I slipped away again, back into the cool air outside the tent. The garden lights were dimmer now, swaying slightly in the breeze. I walked the gravel path with practiced steps, the kind that didn't announce movement, but also didn't apologize for it. I needed distance, not from the event, but from the noise inside my own thoughts. Standing by the farthest bench, near the edge of the arbor, I pulled out my phone and unlocked the folder I'd avoided opening since March. The one labeled June Plan. It held everything. Photos from the gown's original sketch meetings. Emails from the designer's assistant confirming creative direction. A voice memo of the fitting where the designer said, "This isn't about the dress, it's about who wears it." I added a new file, a note I titled, "For When It's Time." No drama, no rage, just evidence, all of it. Let them write their versions. I was building a record. They could silence a moment, but not a movement. As I turned to head back inside, one of the AV crew members stood just off to the side, his badge half tucked behind a jacket. He didn't say anything, just extended a folded piece of paper into my hand and walked away. I opened it under the glow of the nearest light. "Someone told us not to run it, but we have a backup file. Just say the word." By the time the cake plates had been cleared and the final champagne pours made their way to gloved hands, the air inside the tent felt warmer, looser. Conversations turned casual, laughter louder. The carefully arranged decor now looked slightly askew, less curated, more lived in. People had begun to relax into the evening, slightly buzzed, slightly tired. That's when she made her move. I spotted Vashti weaving toward me from across the tent, holding 2 glasses of champagne like a hostess closing a deal. Her smile stretched wide, just enough to show her teeth, just enough to suggest charm rather than malice. I stayed seated, my posture poised, my face unreadable. "A toast," she said lightly, offering 1 glass with a gentle tilt of her wrist. "To what, exactly?" I asked, taking the glass, but not sipping. "To surviving another family gathering without someone storming out," she replied, voice sugar-coated. "That's worth celebrating, isn't it?" She raised her glass slightly. I mirrored the motion without clinking. Her hand shook slightly, not from nerves, but calculation. Then came the accident, with a sudden stagger backward, followed by a quick gasp and the sound of liquid splashing against fabric. She let the glass tip forward. Champagne cascaded toward my lap, straight for the intricate embroidery at the center of my custom gown. Gasps rose around us, followed by her loud, rehearsed apology. "Oh my gosh, these heels! I am so clumsy!" Laughter followed, not genuine, but the awkward kind people use to fill uncomfortable space. The liquid didn't soak in. It beaded on the surface and rolled down the fabric harmlessly, pooling at the hem and dripping onto the floor. "Good thing the dress is smarter than us all," I said calmly, brushing the droplets away with the edge of a linen napkin. I didn't stand. I didn't flinch. I looked her straight in the eye and smiled. "No worries?" I added, deliberately measured. She blinked. Her expression faltered. Then I stood slowly, handed my untouched glass back to her, and walked away, leaving her standing there with the empty glass, the limp apology, and the attention she hadn't earned. Sometimes, I thought, the best slap is the sound of nothing breaking. The whispering started almost immediately, not from my lips, but from others around the room. Did she really just try to ruin the bride's dress? It didn't even leave a mark. She did that on purpose, right? No one said it to my face. They didn't have to. The shift in their tone, the glances passed between friends, the way people leaned in when I passed by, all of it confirmed that they'd seen enough. And Vashti? She smiled a little too tightly, stood a little too still. The laughter that once followed her now felt thinner, more delayed. That was when I noticed a woman at the edge of the tent, someone I hadn't met before, tailored suit, clipboard in hand, earpiece tucked behind a sleek bob. She wasn't a guest. She was part of the designer's team. Our eyes met. She nodded once and approached quietly. "I'm Isolde," she said in a voice that didn't ask permission to be taken seriously. "I believe we have something to clarify." I stepped aside with her, and she motioned for one of her assistants to join. In hushed tones, she confirmed what I had suspected. They'd been watching from the sidelines. They had been instructed not to mention the dress during the earlier showcase. But the champagne incident, that had changed things. "We need to make a statement," she said. "It won't be dramatic. It'll be the truth." She walked toward the microphone as the evening's final announcements began. The host stepped aside, recognizing her presence immediately. When she spoke, the room stilled. "That dress you saw tonight," she said, "was handcrafted by the Xanthi Design House, valued at over $500,000. Commissioned, customized, and fully funded by the bride herself." No fanfare. No dramatic pause, just a single sentence delivered with surgical precision. Forks paused mid-air, wine glasses hung mid-toast, conversations died mid-sentence. Vashti, still standing near the back table, turned a pale shade of disbelief. My parents sat in stone silence, their hands clenched, eyes unmoving. Then came the applause. It began slowly, just a few scattered claps from the far end, then more, louder, until the room echoed with it. It wasn't for the price tag, it was for the poise. For every moment I hadn't retaliated, hadn't made a scene, hadn't taken the bait. It was for surviving beautifully. People came up afterward, one by one, offering more than compliments. They spoke of grace, of restraint, of dignity, not of sequins or shoes, but of stillness, of strength. A woman I didn't know said, "Now that's elegance, earned, not borrowed." Another asked about the fabric. I explained briefly the science behind the hydrophobic threads. How the embroidery was reinforced not just for style, but for function. My voice didn't tremble. My parents hovered nearby but didn't speak. Vashti had slipped into the background, no longer surrounded by admirers. Her glass was empty, her voice absent. They never imagined I'd shine by doing nothing, but my silence had spoken louder than every spotlight they'd ever tried to steal. As I made my way toward the edge of the room, preparing to leave, a photographer stopped me. "Would you mind if we submitted your story to Vogue's bridal issue?" she asked, her voice cautious. I smiled. "Only if you spell my name right this time." The brunch was dressed in white linens and restraint. The garden patio behind my parents' home was filled with laughter that didn't quite reach anyone's eyes. Small talk floated like pollen, thick, fluffy, and mostly irrelevant. The kind of language people used when something huge had already happened, but no one wanted to be the first to mention it. I arrived 20 minutes after the official start time, deliberately so. My entrance wasn't grand, but it was noticed. Conversations paused momentarily as I stepped through the lattice arch, phone in hand, steps steady. I was composed by design, down to the slightly tousled hair and a cream jumpsuit that said, "Successful, not trying too hard." Vashti was already there, of course, laughing a little too loudly beside a mimosa pitcher. Her circle, tight and eager, clung to her with the familiarity of people who had yet to read yesterday's headlines. I moved through them like smoke, light, but impossible to ignore. The tension was hard to name. Polite smiles edged with awkwardness, clinks of glasses that couldn't quite smooth over what had unfolded the night before. I could see it in the way my father held his napkin just a second too long before placing it on his lap. In the way my mother adjusted the floral centerpiece for no real reason at all. They assumed the credits had rolled, I thought. But sometimes the real scene happens after the curtain falls. I hadn't even made it to my seat when Drew, the financial consultant and one of my husband's closest friends, appeared at my elbow. He leaned in just enough to be private. "You'll want to see this." We stepped aside, just behind a trimmed hedge near the fountain. He pulled out his phone and showed me a series of screenshots. There it was, a digital ledger from the family trust account, transfers labeled wedding preparation, event PR, and vendor scouting, all routed through the same sub-account managed by my father. And all leading to Vashti. "Flight to Miami," one entry read. "Fashion Week tickets," another. "Social media consultant retainer." I scrolled through them slowly, eyes scanning each timestamp. Some of the expenses had occurred months before my wedding had even been announced. Then he showed me the message thread, Vashti to her assistant. "Just funnel it through Dad's side. They'll never check. Make it look like rehearsal expenses. Worst case, we say it was miscommunication. I didn't blink, didn't curse, didn't flinch. I looked up at Drew. Can you send everything to my folder? He nodded. Already did. Named it Untangled. Password is your wedding date. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. Lips parted slightly, but no words emerging. Not because I didn't have them, but because the moment didn't require them. Not yet. Back at the brunch table, I sipped orange juice with calm calculation. Conversations resumed around me. Vashti's voice cut through the air like a lacquered knife. But the air had shifted. I opened my phone again and forwarded the screenshots to 2 trustees on the family foundation board. CC'd both of my parents. Subject line, for review. Message, please review the attached records ahead of our Monday morning integrity session. No exclamation marks, no bold text, just the truth, plain and full of consequence. A minute passed. My father glanced down at his phone. His expression tightened as he read, jaw locking into a familiar line of denial. My mother read the same message moments later. She froze mid-laugh, her fingers tightening around the flute of mimosa. Neither looked at me. I tore a piece of croissant and bit slowly. They had always taught me that success required grace. Now they were going to learn what grace looked like when it stopped playing dead. She used the family's legacy like a credit card, I thought, letting the crisp pastry melt on my tongue. Now I'm holding the receipt. From across the patio, I caught the eye of an older cousin, Elaine. She raised one eyebrow and murmured just loud enough, "Funny how quickly reputations shift, huh?" I gave a small smile and looked away. The truth didn't need cheerleaders. It only needed witnesses. The brunch dragged forward. But something had broken in the air, quiet but irreparable. Guests no longer clustered around Vashti like moths to a flame. They started checking their phones, stepping away for private calls, pretending to need more coffee. Even Vashti noticed. She turned on her charm, louder than before, laughing too hard at her own jokes, smiling with extra teeth. Then, in a moment of trying to regain the room, she stood with a glass and tapped it lightly. "I just want to say," she announced, "that no matter what's happened this weekend, family is family. We forgive, we move on, and we celebrate together." Several heads turned toward me. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my glass. I just spoke, softly, steadily. Forgiveness begins where accountability lives. The silence that followed could have swallowed the garden whole. Vashti smiled, tightly. Someone coughed. A napkin dropped. I placed my glass on the table and stood, not to make a speech, but to leave. On my way out, just past the hedge near the coat rack, my phone buzzed again. A new airdropped file. I opened it without hesitation. It was a video. Vashti's assistant, pacing in a dim room, speaking angrily on a call. She told me to fake invoices. If anyone finds out, I'm not going down alone. Sunday morning carried the kind of stillness that usually followed a storm. Not destruction, but reconfiguration. I sat at my dining table with a mug of coffee cooling slowly between my palms. My apartment was quiet except for the occasional chirp of a notification from my phone. Each buzz added another layer to the hum inside me, a media request, a podcast invitation, screenshots of social media posts, my face, my dress, now part of a campaign titled True Elegance. My wedding, once erased by my family, was now front and center in a nationwide campaign celebrating resilience, authenticity, and grace. I clicked through the media folder Xanthi's creative team had uploaded overnight. The images weren't overly polished, candid shots of me fixing my veil, smiling as my husband reached for my hand, laughing with Tatiana after the cake. None of them posed, all of them powerful. Then came the call. "Hey, Ella," said the voice on the other end, smooth and clipped. "This is Marcella from Xanthi's office. Just wanted to say, thank you." "For what?" I asked. "You didn't just wear the dress," she said. "You redefined who gets to wear one." I said nothing, but I smiled. They dressed me in silence, I thought. I returned it in spotlight. That afternoon, I put on flats and a trench coat and made a series of deliveries. No assistants, no messengers, just me and a stack of heavy cream-colored envelopes. Each guest who had attended the wedding, each one who had asked quiet questions, whispered doubts, or chosen to remain neutral, received the same thing. A printed photo of me in the dress, the invoice stamped "paid" in clean red lettering, and a short note. For those who wondered if I belonged, I never needed to ask. I dropped the envelopes through mail slots, handed them directly to receptionists, left them on doormats. At my parents' house, I rang the bell and left the envelope in my mother's favorite wreath. At Vashti's condo, I didn't ring. I just slid the envelope under the door and walked away. Later that evening, I received a text from a friend who had attended. "Just opened your envelope. You're something else. I'm sorry I didn't say more sooner." That was the pattern. Some stunned, others shamed. A few simply silent, but no one could unsee it. Then, a text from my cousin. Vashti opened hers, laughed, and muttered, "Overcompensating much?" I didn't respond. If knowing my worth is too much for you, I thought, that's because you were never enough for me. That night, as I curled up on the couch, phone in hand, I saw it. A TikTok post, shot by a guest, captioned, "Bride silenced by her family, then crowned by couture." It was footage from the reception, the champagne moment, the silence, the designer's announcement. All edited together in a 60-second montage that hit like a movie trailer. Within 2 hours, it had over 400,000 views. By morning, 2.4 million. I scrolled through the comments. She didn't say a word, but she said everything. This is for every woman who was told to shrink. We've all been the sister they pretend doesn't shine. Hashtags flooded the feed. Hashtag elegance. Needs no approval. Hide from silence. To statement. Not. Just the other daughter. I didn't cry. Not from hurt, but from recognition. They saw me, not just in a dress, but in my truth. I put the phone down and let the moment sit. I didn't post, didn't share, didn't need to. This wasn't about going viral. It was about breaking the silence they handed me like a family heirloom. The next day, I declined 4 interviews, agreed to 1 podcast. A woman who had once been cut out of her family's will for choosing a partner they didn't approve of. We spoke quietly, over Zoom, about identity, silence, and the slow work of reclaiming space. That night, over dinner, my husband poured me a glass of wine. "So, still think you should have worn flats instead?" he asked, grinning. I leaned into him and chuckled. "Let them trip over their own heels. Mine took me home." We toasted, not to vengeance, but to arrival. Just before bed, my phone buzzed again. A message from my father. 4 words. "We need to talk. Mom's not doing well." I stared at the screen. I didn't respond. Not yet. 3 days after the wedding, I stood in front of a mirror in my apartment, smoothing the fabric of a non-branded cream jumpsuit. No sequins, no embellishments, just clean lines, a fitted waist, and quiet confidence. The kind of outfit that didn't whisper for attention. It earned it. The invitation to the charity gala had arrived 2 days prior. Sent by my father's assistant, the envelope thick and impersonal. I'd debated tossing it, but something in me needed to walk into that ballroom, not for them, but for me. I arrived fashionably late, letting the hum of clinking glasses and polished conversations fill the space before I stepped inside. Heads turned, not all at once, not dramatically, but noticeably. Some people offered overly warm greetings, others nodded stiffly, calculating which version of the family story to believe. Vashti arrived 30 minutes later, draped in a gown nearly identical to the one from her wedding reception, but this time in silver. I watched the way the fabric caught the light and noticed how no one looked long enough for it to matter. It's one thing to fall out of the spotlight, I thought. It's another to see it shift mid-stage. As I made my way toward a quiet corner near the silent auction table, I heard whispers, not malicious, more like curiosity tangled in hesitation. "She looks different. Is that her from the campaign?" I didn't know she was on the board. I didn't smile. I didn't correct them. I simply stood tall and let the air settle around me. Near the stage, a designer from a boutique brand squinted at Vashti's gown. She leaned toward the person next to her and said, "That's not original." That's a replicated pattern. It's from 2 seasons ago. It spread from there, soft murmurs turning into side glances, phones pulled discreetly from clutches. Someone posted a photo comparing Vashti's look to a discounted version sold online, side by side. Within an hour, someone sent me the post. Caption: Legacy and labels? I stared at the screen briefly before locking it and placing it back into my purse. When you've spent years borrowing shine, I thought, all it takes is one light to reveal the rust. The shift in energy was slow, but certain. Guests began drifting away from Vashti's orbit and toward mine. Not because I asked, not because I spoke, but because they'd seen enough, not just at the wedding, but before and after. People came with questions about my work, about the campaign, about how I balance design with ethical sourcing. I answered all of them, not to impress, but to inform. Vashti tried to reclaim attention. She laughed a little louder, introduced herself with just a bit more force, but her voice no longer anchored the room. My parents kept their composure, sipping wine, nodding, engaging in shallow conversations with other donors, but even they noticed. My father's hand trembled slightly on his glass. My mother's eyes flitted too often toward me. One of the board members approached, someone I had only met once, briefly. "You held your poise," he said. "Your sister clutched at her image. Only one of you evolved." "Respect isn't inherited," I said quietly. "It's earned." And tonight, they saw the difference. Later that evening, Vashti pulled me aside into a side corridor near the restrooms, away from the main hall, out of earshot. "You turned them against me," she said, her voice low but sharp. "I didn't turn anyone," I replied, eyes steady. "They just saw what you've hidden behind labels." She took a step forward. "You've always been jealous." I almost laughed. "No," I said. "I was invisible." But I stopped needing mirrors to recognize my reflection. She opened her mouth, then closed it. No follow-up, no insult, just silence. She walked out, heels clicking faster than usual. I didn't follow. I returned to my table, took a sip of water, and resumed a conversation about sustainable textiles with an architect from Boston. As the gala wrapped up, I retrieved my coat and stepped outside into the cool night air. The city buzzed in the background, but it felt distant, like something behind glass. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Dinner this Sunday. Just us. Please come." I stared at the screen. Too late? I wondered. Or maybe, just late enough for the truth to finally have a seat at the table. The room wasn't big, but the spotlight made it feel like a stadium. Rows of chairs filled with women, some seasoned, some just starting out, watched the stage where I stood. The Women in Tech Summit was known for bold speakers and headline soundbites. I didn't come for either. I came because they asked me to talk about building something when you were told you had no business holding a hammer. The host didn't introduce me as the viral bride. Instead, she opened with a list of numbers: the valuation of my company, our latest government sustainability contracts, a recent feature in Fast Company. I watched the expressions shift in the audience: surprise, then curiosity, then attention. They didn't expect me to be here for substance. I adjusted the microphone. "I'm not going to stand here and pretend this was all confidence," I said. "Much of this began in silence. That's where I lived for a long time. Until I built something louder." I spoke clearly, not theatrically. I talked about the nights I stayed up calculating both budgets and risks, about growing a team of 10 into 75, about getting rejected from funding rounds and then outlasting the companies that dismissed me. Every woman in that room had heard a version of "maybe later" from people who never intended to come back. The applause at the end wasn't thunderous. It was steady, focused, respectful. It filled the space, not with noise, but with something much harder to earn: belief. As I stepped off stage, a woman in a bright scarf approached. "I just love how you married a blue-collar guy," she said. "It's inspiring. Not many women at your level do that." I smiled gently. "He's actually the founder of a water tech company, MIT grad, served 6 years as a senior engineer with the Department of Defense." Her mouth parted. A quiet pause followed. Others within earshot glanced over, curious. A few minutes later, someone asked me about his latest patent. Then another about how we managed to grow independently. I answered honestly, no bragging, no embellishment, just facts. They reduced him to a title, I thought, as I moved from conversation to conversation, just like they reduced me to a dress. Neither of us stayed there. We had never been a fairy tale. There was no rescue, only two people who learned that peace came when you stopped shrinking. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Viral bride, not just a pretty face. Tech CEO built quiet empire. Turns out the family's real legacy was the one they ignored. Ayala's rise from silent sister to industry powerhouse. Each article unraveled the narrative Vashti had worked years to construct, of being the only beacon, the golden heir. The spotlight shifted, not because I demanded it, but because I outlasted the fog. Vashti tried to respond. A long-winded post on her curated blog, a vague reference to media spins, followed by heavily filtered photos of her at charity events. The comments were different this time. Didn't she say her sister was just trying to marry into comfort? Guess the real empire was built outside the family tree. Maybe don't throw champagne when your house is made of glass. She didn't delete the post, but the traffic died fast. They told the wrong story for too long, I thought, sitting in my home office sipping tea. I just rewrote it, one truth at a time. That afternoon, a message popped up. Vashti, we should sit down and talk. I'm sure we can align narratives. I stared at the screen, expressionless. I took a screenshot. Then I deleted the thread. I was done aligning for people who never saw me as equal, only useful. My husband passed by the doorway and caught my eye. Everything all right? Yeah, I said. Just noise. He walked in and kissed my forehead. You don't need to respond to noise. I exhaled. No, I whispered. I've spent too long confusing noise with importance. This silence is mine now. I closed the laptop. Just as I stood, a knock sounded at the door. I opened it to find a courier holding a slim envelope addressed in familiar handwriting. From my mother. 2 pages, written neatly, not printed. The last line read, I saw you this time. I really saw you. The brownstone looked the same, ivy clinging to the iron railings, the chipped brick around the threshold where I once scraped my knees on summer afternoons. But standing in front of it now felt like revisiting a museum exhibit. Curated memories encased in glass, familiar but untouchable. My husband offered to come. I declined. This one I have to walk into alone, I told him. I rang the bell, clutching my coat tighter against the wind even though it wasn't cold. The door opened too quickly, as if she'd been standing right behind it. My mother. She smiled like it was any other Sunday. Come in, she said, stepping aside. The foyer smelled of lemon cleaner and something faintly floral, probably the same potpourri she'd kept by the stairs for years. My father wasn't there. He had some meetings run over, she said lightly, already walking toward the dining room. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. His absence wasn't logistical, it was tactical. The table was set for 2, white tablecloth, mismatched china that had belonged to her mother, chicken, roasted vegetables, wine, a meal that looked intentional but not extravagant. As we sat, she looked at me with a kind of practiced softness. You've grown into such a composed woman, she said. I smiled faintly. It's been a long road. She poured the wine, talked about the food, asked how business was going. She sprinkled compliments across the table like garnish, but none of them tasted like honesty. Then, somewhere between bites of roasted carrots and her second glass of wine, she said it. I want to apologize for not seeing you sooner. It landed quietly, like a leaf on water. I looked at her, searching for depth behind the eyes, but they were rehearsed, still measuring. I didn't interrupt. I didn't reject. I just listened. She went on. Something about being blinded by expectations. About how Vashti demanded attention from the moment she could speak, and how I was always so independent. I guess I thought you didn't need us as much, she added, the edges of her voice tight. What I heard was, you didn't perform the way we liked. What I felt was, it's not that she didn't love me, she just never wanted to know me. When she finished, she looked at me with watery eyes, the silence between us brimming. I took a sip of wine, set the glass down, and said, "I forgive what I understand, and I understand now why you couldn't love loudly." She blinked hard. For the first time, she didn't have a reply. We sat in silence for a few minutes, not tense, just present. Eventually, she asked, "Do you think we could rebuild?" I folded my napkin slowly, considering the question as if it were made of glass. "I'm not looking to repair this," I said, gently but clearly. "I'm learning to live without it." She inhaled sharply. "You don't mean that." "I do," I said. "But not as punishment, as clarity." She looked down at her plate. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her fork again, but didn't take a bite. After a moment, she asked, "Is there any hope?" I leaned back, meeting her eyes with a steadiness that surprised even me. "If I ever return," I said, "it'll be as someone you have to get to know all over again, not the shadow you tried to raise." Her shoulders fell, not in defeat, but in resignation. We toasted softly at the end, no fanfare, no proclamations, just two women at a table, accepting a respectful distance. On my way out, she reached for my hand. I let her hold it. There's power, I thought, in walking away without slamming the door. The Brooklyn air felt lighter when I stepped outside. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt clean. I walked slowly, letting the rhythm of the city fill the spaces between my thoughts. Horns in the distance. Someone laughing too loud on a stoop. The thud of sneakers against pavement. I thought about the stories we inherit, the ones we rewrite, the ones we decide not to pass down. One day, if I had a daughter, I'd tell her this: "You don't owe your healing to the ones who broke you." I flagged down a cab. "Where to?" the driver asked. I looked ahead. "Home," I said. Later, as I walked into my apartment, I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door and kicked off my shoes. My husband looked up from the couch. "Was it worth going?" he asked. I paused. "Yes," I said. I needed to confirm what I already knew. I walked toward him, leaned down to kiss his forehead. "It's not hate," I added softly. "It's history." The first thing I noticed wasn't the skyline or even the frosted letters spelling my name on the glass. It was the silence, the kind that didn't beg for applause, but claimed space without explanation. Ayala Interiors Group. The lettering glinted faintly in the morning sun as I stepped through the door of our new office downtown. Not inherited, not gifted, mine, etched like a scar that had healed but still spoke of where I'd been. "Morning, boss." Dana, my assistant, smiled as she handed me a bouquet. "Not lilies. We figured wildflowers were more your speed." I touched one gently. Lavender. Echinacea. Clover. Not curated elegance. Natural, unpredictable, rooted. In the conference room, the team discussed design drafts for a women's shelter renovation. Clean lines, dignity built into every corner. They don't know where these ideas came from, I thought. That they were born from silence, rejection, and every night I walked out of my own house with my voice still buried inside me. Framed on the wall near reception was a quote, "Elegance needs no approval, Isolde." I stared at it for a moment longer than usual, then turned and walked into my office. Later that morning, my inbox chimed. Subject: Board vote, congratulations. It was from a nonprofit Isolde served on. They were naming their next mentorship award after me, for leadership under pressure, for integrity in adversity. I blinked. Attached was a clip from a recent community summit. A young speaker referenced the viral clip from my wedding. She reminded us that dignity isn't loud, but it's never invisible. The emails kept coming. This time, not for scandal, not for sound bites, but for collaboration, for guidance, for space. Journalists wanting to discuss emotional inheritance and how to break the cycles that come dressed as legacy. They tried to humiliate me with lace and lighting, I thought. I turned it into a platform. A few days later, I saw a clip of Vashti on a podcast. Her followers dwindled, the comment section filled with skepticism. She still believes she's the narrative, I thought, but the story shifted while she wasn't watching. Then came another text from my parents. Would I come to dinner? Again. This time, I didn't answer right away. That night, I wrote a simple reply. Thank you, but I've already found a table where I'm not served leftovers. I stared at the screen for a long time before hitting send. My husband watched me from the kitchen island, wine glass in hand. You sure? I nodded. It's not hate that keeps me away. It's health. Later, as I sorted mail, I found a small, unmarked envelope. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note from a family friend. You changed more than your image. You changed how we measure value. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer where I kept the others, reminders not of approval, but of transformation. Before leaving the office that night, I opened another drawer. Inside was a letter I had written to myself exactly 1 year ago. I had sealed it back then, unsure if I'd ever open it. Now I did. Dear me, it began. You don't know this yet, but your silence will not be the end of you. It will be the root. I read it all, then slid it back, added a new line at the bottom. You made it home. I sealed it again and labeled the drawer. Do not forget. On the rooftop, I let the wind kiss my cheeks. Below, the city hummed with its usual noise, unaware of how much had changed in this one life. My name doesn't need to echo in their halls, I whispered. It lives in the places I build. Just as I turned to head back inside, my phone buzzed. A text from Isolde. Only 3 words. It's your turn. I smiled.